But let's turn now to some details about events that that are surely happening in the future, but you might find yourself in these events. I mean, if you live to see these events happen, this is going to be exciting times that we live in. Frightful times that we live in, though, right? Very, very frightful if we begin to look at some of the details of what's right around the corner. Let's start entertaining a discussion on, and this is just a teaser. So we're not going to, I absolutely can't do this justice, but let's entertain this topic known as the 70 weeks and the Messiah, or the 70 weeks, has been termed the 70 weeks of Daniel. And in order to do so, we're going to jump into kind of context. We're jumping past a bunch of chapters that we are going to go back and look at actually starting next week, because I think the schedule calls for us to start looking at passages related to end time events and things like that. And Daniel's one of the earlier places that we're going to start. Actually, we're going to start as early as maybe the book of Genesis. But this is just a teaser, right? So for the next, say, half an hour, let's talk about Daniel's 70 weeks, and particularly the 70th week of Daniel. So if you've never heard these terms, you can Google search this, right? Daniel's 70th week. And I already Google searched it for you on this next tab, as you can see on my screen. But let's first read some relevant scriptures related to this concept of Daniel's 70 weeks. Jumping into context, I realize, right, this doesn't really do it justice, so just bear with me. This is a sneak preview. It's a trailer, if you were to put it in modern terminology. 70 weeks and the Messiah is what it's labeled in the NASB Bible that I've got pulled up on the screen. Starting in verse 24 of chapter 9, so 9:24. And we're going to read all the way down through the end of the chapter, which is verse 27. So 9:24 through 27. Very famous section of scripture. Blow that up for us. Does that look good? Yeah, that looks good. Let's blow it up. Very famous section of scripture for prophecy buffs, right? 70 weeks of Daniel. All right, let's read this. 70 weeks, starting verse 24. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the wrongdoing, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for guilt, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So that's verse 24. Let me see, maybe that might be too big. No, I think I'll leave it. All right, so we're talking about Daniel's vision. Daniel was given a vision of some end-time events, and it was facilitated through the angels that were speaking with him. And a lot of it had to do with events that were relevant to him, because remember, historically, Daniel's exiled in Babylon right now. God was judging Israel for her disobedience, for her wickedness, for her harlotry, for her idolatry. He allowed the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, to come down and sack Jerusalem. First time a Gentile king had done this, right? Which is going to be prominent for us to consider. A king had not only exiled the people, but had sacked Jerusalem and the temple and carried the people off. And so Daniel's writing from there, from Babylon, and he's praying to God to forgive him and his people for their sins. And he does have, this time we know for sure, that Daniel has access to the prophecies that were given prior to the exile, which was Isaiah and Jeremiah. The pre-exilic prophets wrote and warned Israel to turn away from the sin, or else God was going to do the very thing that he just did, send them into exile. And so Daniel, we know that he has access to those scrolls. He's contemplating those. But at this point in time, the angel begins to give him a vision and then to give him some of the details. Starting in verse 25, so you are to know and understand that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. And then the prophecy continues. It will be built again, speaking of the temple, it will be built again with streets and moat, even in times of distress. Verse 26, then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing, or the anointed one, will be cut off and have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. And its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war. Desolations are determined. Verse 27, and he will confirm a covenant. Notice it just jumps. He will confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week. And it's odd to us that they're using these time markers of weeks, but we're going to find out later on that these are not actually 7-day weeks. They're actually years. And he will confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, He will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come the one who makes desolate until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, gushes forth on the one who makes desolate. And that's the end of the vision, at least for this part of Daniel. Now, we already know that the other parts of the book of Daniel fill in a lot of the details for some of the events that take place leading up to this, some that take place afterwards. But just for our sneak preview tonight, just for our trailer, teaser trailer, whatever you want to call it, we're just going to focus on Daniel's 70 weeks and Daniel's 70th week. So what we can ascertain is that the prophecy is concerning right away, right out of the gate, verse 24. This is for your people and your holy city. So we can put in context that this is not a prophecy that generally speaks to the entire world per se. This is rather a prophecy of events that is directly addressed to Daniel's people, i.e. the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, and particularly the temple and Jerusalem and the local environs there. It's been decreed for your people and your holy city. Your people are the Jewish people, or the people of Israel. And your holy city is obviously Jerusalem. There's no other context that could be allowed there. And then the prophecy mentions that it mentions all these kind of details, kind of very broadly speaking, to finish the wrongdoings, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for guilt, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So there are all these details that may happen in rapid succession. They may be strung out over a long period of time. The vision doesn't say right here just yet. But what we do see is that some of the details are spelled out. It says, no one understand that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Well, at the time that Daniel was receiving this prophecy, Jerusalem and the temple had been sacked and destroyed. So Daniel's given assurance from God that the temple would be rebuilt at some point in time in the future. Now, Daniel probably still doesn't know how far into the future, but we do know that from the prophet Jeremiah's perspective, that it was a 70-year exile that was foretold. So Daniel probably has that perspective. After 70 years, the exile will be reversed and we'll be able to go back to our land and start rebuilding our temple. This prophecy gives us the assurance that at least the decree to restore and rebuild the temple will take place. Messiah the Prince, up until Messiah the Prince, there'll be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. We do basic math, 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Excuse me. If the weeks, even if they're just mere weeks, right, of 7, then we're talking about 7 and 62 equals 69. It's just a clever way of saying there will be 69 weeks. In fact, your modern Bibles say they just say 69 weeks. But the literal Hebrew or Aramaic actually said 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Well, 62 plus 7 is 69. Well, if these were literal weeks and we're just talking about a time frame on our calendar, it's not very long, right? Just a few months or a few years, right? Depending on how you interpret the word weeks. But what we end up learning is that according to biblical prophecy, what Daniel was really being told was that each week corresponded to a 7-year time period of a 360-day prophetic year, not a 365-day solar year like we have in our modern calendars. In the Bible, and you can find this out if you just go back and compare scripture using other passages that talk about how long the time was in reckon according to biblical time frame. A year was 360 days. So the week here is a 7-year time period, and thus when Daniel's told that 7 weeks and 62 weeks, which we know is 69 weeks, well, we're really talking about 490 years in total, but 483 of them correspond to the 69 weeks. I'll put a little graphic on the screen that kind of helps explain some of that a little bit more as well. I think I'm saying that right. If I mixed up some of that, those of you who are prophecy buffs, you're listening, watching this video, and you're like, no, Ariel, you got your math wrong. Don't worry. I'll flash a little graphic on the screen that'll clean my math up there. But the point for our study is that we're talking about a long stretch of time, longer than Daniel would be alive to see all of these events take place. To be sure, there's no way that the temple could be rebuilt in 62 literal weeks. So we know that it's not literal. That's the point I'm trying to say. All of the events couldn't possibly take place in the literal week. We know that it's symbolic of something longer. And indeed, it really was. This is really a snapshot of Israel's history as is seen through the lens of what we're going to later learn is the times of the Gentiles. The times where the temple has been destroyed by a Gentile king and is going to be built and then destroyed again, because we know in 70 AD, we know from history that the temple, even though it does get rebuilt, it gets destroyed again by the Roman armies of Titus in 70 AD. So even though the temple is going to be rebuilt in time, it still falls within the umbrella of a historical time frame that the Bible refers to as the times of the Gentiles, or the trampling down of the temple under the times of the Gentiles, the fullness of the Gentiles, and things like that. Paul talks about that in Romans chapter 11. We're talking about a slice of Israel's history where Gentile peoples have dominated either the land of Israel to some extent, the land of the city of Jerusalem to some extent, and or the temple itself has been suffered under harm or destruction to some extent. So starting with the Babylonian king of Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the temple and sacked Jerusalem, starting at that point and moving forward, even currently now in 2023, the temple in Jerusalem still lies in ruins. So we're still within the times of the Gentiles. In other words, we've been in this time period of the times of the Gentiles, and yet we know it's been longer than 400 and so many years. So what we are beginning to realize that there's actually some form of gap that has moved in. We'll talk about that in a bit. If I get to it tonight, great. If I don't get to tonight, don't be confused. So Daniel's told all these details, and after 62 weeks, remember, these are not literal weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. The people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Wow. In one prophecy, Daniel's told the city, you're going to rebuild the temple. It's going to be rebuilt. Oh, but by the way, it's going to be destroyed again. I mean, must be like a bit of a downer there for Daniel. I think this is prophesying the 70 AD destruction there. Its end will come with a flood, even to the end. There will be war, desolations are determined. And then he will confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week. And this 1 week that Daniel's told about must refer to another 7-year period. But oddly enough, and we're going to find this out later on, as soon as I turn to the chart, you're going to see this. The 69 weeks of 7 years were kind of all clustered together. They all happened in succession, one right after the other. But when it came to the last 7-year time period, the 70th week, there has been this gap of almost 2,000 years between the 69th week and the 70th week. That's really what's going on. Almost every well-meaning Bible prophecy student and teacher recognizes what I'm describing to you now as this gap between the 69 weeks and this final 70th week. But important for our study, we're going to find out that just like the previous 69 weeks pertain to Daniel and his people, i.e. the Jewish people and the temple and Jerusalem and all of that, the 70th week likewise pertains to Israel as a people, Jerusalem as a city, and the temple and being kind of the focal point of all the events. It's aptly said that God's timepiece is Israel. If you want to know what's going on in the world, look at Israel. If you want to figure out what's on God's agenda, pay careful attention to what's going on with Israel. And so because we've been in this long gap of 2,000 years where Israel's been outside of her land for a good chunk of that, where the temple's still destroyed, where Jerusalem has been, parts of Jerusalem aren't even under Jewish control, right? Half of Jerusalem is still under Arab control or Palestinian control. Part of it's under control by a certain amount of Christian groups and things like that. Israel is kind of still divided up. There's parts of Israel that are given over to, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And so Israel's, even though she's in her land, there's not lasting peace there yet. There's a lot of conflict, right? That's a no-brainer. So when we're looking at these prophecies, and we're going to see as time goes on, and we'll look at more details in time. So don't get confused and disappointed if I'm not giving you everything now. We're going to find out that God is going to slowly start bringing all of these prophecies closer and closer to the location in the Middle East where most of the end time events are going to take place. America, there's not a lot that seems to take place over in America. That's predominantly already predicted in the book of Revelation and things like that. Most of what takes place in the book of Revelation seems to be centered in the Middle East, right around, like I said, the epicenter being Jerusalem. A lot seems to take place in some of the northern regions north of Israel, either Turkey or maybe western, even as far maybe as western Russia or Iraq and Iran, right to the east of Israel. We could continue moving up to the north and move west a little bit. Turkey. Then we've got the Balkans and Croatia and stuff is up in there. And then we start moving a little farther west into Europe, modern day Europe, but what used to be the ancient Roman Empire. And as we're going to find out, a lot of the prophecies in the Old Testament were looking forward to a power that would come into existence that we now know is the Roman Empire, right? And so as we look at future prophecies, well, the Roman Empire isn't around anymore. But what if the Roman Empire were to revive? We wouldn't call it really the Roman Empire. We'd just simply call it the EU, right? Because that's the same geographical area. But the Roman Empire covered more than just Europe. In that part of the world, it covered parts of Turkey and even over into parts of today what we might now know as Iran and things like that. So, or Iraq and things. So the point I'm trying to make is a lot of what takes place in end time prophecy really kind of is centered on parts of the world where perhaps maybe those of us in America aren't even really living. And so it's easy for us to kind of say, well, it's not going to affect me. Don't be so sure, because the events that take place in end time prophecy are going to affect the entire world because of the worldwide governmental structures that are going to be imposed. One world religious system, one world politics, one world economic system, one world buying and selling through the mark of the beast and things like that. One world persecution of Christians, right? When the Antichrist goes after those who won't take his mark, you think he's only going to go after people in Israel? You think he's only going to focus on Jews in Jerusalem? Oh, you feisty Jews, you're not taking my mark. I'm going to persecute you. But the rest of the world, you guys are scot-free, right? I'm going to let you off. Not on your life. Not only is he going to go after those Jews, which he has this fierce demonic hatred of, right? Satanic hatred of the Jewish people. But he is going to go after, according to Revelation chapter 12, he's going to go off and make war and persecute Christians as well. Anyone who names the name of God, anyone who defies his claim to be very God himself is going to be the object of his persecution. So this is going to affect everyone in the world. Sooner or later, what he's going to implement in the Middle East, let's just assume his headquarters is in Jerusalem for a moment. Whatever he implements from his headquarters, from his home base there, is going to affect everyone in the world sooner or later. So it doesn't matter where you live. You will be affected. So back to Daniel, right? In the middle of the week, what week? The 70th week, in the middle of this 7-year period, which means the middle is right around a 3.5-year period. In fact, it neatly fits at the 3.5-year period, as we're going to find in other details. He puts a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abomination will come the one who makes desolate, right? This bad guy. We're going to call him Antichrist, right? Because he's in place of Messiah and he opposes Messiah, which is what anti kind of factors in. Until and he's a fake Messiah, right? He's gonna masquerade as the real thing. He's gonna make himself out to be Messiah and declare himself to be the Messiah, and a lot of people are gonna believe him. He's gonna make things really bad for Israel and for Jerusalem, for the Jewish people, for the temple, until a complete destruction. One of the decree gushes forth on the one who makes desolate. Right? In other words, he's gonna meet his own end.